There are horror movies that scare you with what's hiding in the dark. And then there's The Thing, a film that scares you by turning the lights on and asking you to look at the people standing right next to you. John Carpenter's The Thing isn't built around jump scares or easy shocks. It's built around erosion. The slow breakdown of certainty. The quiet realization that the things we rely on most, faces, voices, bodies, routines, might not mean what we think they mean. By the time the fear fully takes shape, it's already done its damage. The story unfolds at the edge of the world, in a place so isolated that mistakes can't be corrected, and help can't arrive in time to matter. Antarctica becomes more than a setting. It becomes a condition, a pressure chamber where paranoia has room to breathe, and trust has nowhere to hide. What makes The Thing endure isn't just how frightening it is, it's how physical its horror feels. This is a movie obsessed with the body, with flesh as evidence, with identity as something fragile and temporary. Rob Bottin's practical effects don't create a monster you can memorize or defeat. They create moments where the human form itself becomes unreliable, where transformation feels less like spectacle and more like betrayal. And yet, when the film was first released, it was rejected. Too bleak, too graphic, too cold. It arrived in an era that wanted comfort and optimism, and Carpenter offered suspicion, fire, and the possibility that survival might not feel like a victory at all. Time changed that. As years passed, the film's fears stopped feeling exaggerated and started feeling familiar. Stories about infiltration, invisible threats, and mistrust became a part of the cultural language. The Thing didn't soften, it sharpened. This episode is a journey through the film as it unfolds. Its horror, its craft, and the legacy it built in the cold. A love letter to a movie that refuses reassurance, refuses answers, and refuses to let you walk away certain of anything. Because once the thing gets under your skin, it never really leaves. The story begins without explanation, and that absence is the first warning. A chase cuts across an endless white landscape. Panic without context. Violence without a clear reason. Carpenter opens the film this way because he wants the audience to feel what the characters will soon feel themselves. The sense that something is happening before anyone understands what it is. At Outpost 31, the reaction is casual, almost bored. Men return to their routines. Jokes land. Meals are eaten. Work continues. This stretch matters more than it seems. Carpenter lingers here deliberately, letting normalcy settle in. These aren't people bracing for disaster. They're people who believe the world still follows rules. The trip to the Norwegian camp is where that belief quietly fractures. Nothing there makes sense. The destruction is excessive. The bodies are frozen in fear, their final moments locked into place. And then there's the shape that shouldn't exist. A corpse that looks human, but clearly isn't. Fused into something biology can't explain. Carpenter doesn't rush the moment. He films it clinically, letting the men study it like a problem instead of reacting like victims. That choice sets the tone for everything that follows. Fear doesn't arrive as panic. It arrives as confusion. Science tries to step in where instinct hasn't yet caught up. Questions replace certainty. And beneath it all, the setting does its work. Antarctica isn't just isolated. It's final. There's no exit strategy here. No margin for error. Once something enters this space, it stays. By the end of this first moment, nothing overtly monstrous has happened yet, but something essential has already changed. The assumption that the world is understandable has been shaken. The horror hasn't yet revealed itself, but the ground it needs has already been prepared. The kennel scene is where the thing stops being uneasy and becomes unforgettable. Up to this moment, the fear has been theoretical. Strange evidence, disturbing implications, a sense that something is wrong, but still distant enough to analyze. The kennel shatters that distance. It's the first time the horror fully asserts itself, and it does so without warning, ceremony, or mercy. What makes this scene so effective isn't just what happens, it's where it happens. A confined space, familiar animals, a place meant for containment and safety. Carpenter understood that horror lands harder when it violates expectations, and nothing about the kennel suggests what's about to unfold. When the transformation begins, it doesn't feel like a reveal. It feels like a malfunction. Rob Bottin's practical effects turn the scene into a biological nightmare. What emerges doesn't resemble a creature stepping into the light. It resembles something panicking under exposure. There's no elegance to it, no design meant to be admired. Everything looks defensive, reactive, and unfinished. Carpenter films the chaos with brutal restraint. No guiding score. No attempt to stylize the horror. Alarms blare. Men shout. Fire erupts. The camera stays close enough to overwhelm, but never long enough to offer understanding. You're not meant to study the thing. You're meant to recoil from it. And when the fire finally ends it, the scene doesn't reset the tension. It rewires it. Because now, the rules are clear. The threat isn't waiting outside. It doesn't need to attack openly. It can exist quietly, until it decides not to. The kennel scene doesn't just introduce the monster. It destroys the last illusion of safety. From this point forward, every room is suspect. Every moment of calm feels temporary, and everybody becomes a question mark. The horror has stopped asking for permission, and it's not going back into the cage. After the kennel, the movie never relaxes again. What The Thing understands, better than almost any horror film, is that once you've seen the impossible, you can't unsee it. The threat doesn't need to appear anymore. It has already changed how everyone thinks. This is where paranoia truly takes hold. The men stop sharing space comfortably. Conversations become shorter and sharper. Every decision feels provisional, as if it might be overturned the moment new information surfaces. Carpenter doesn't rush this shift. He lets it seep in quietly, scene by scene, until mistrust feels like the most logical response available. Importantly, the film refuses to show you how the thing spreads. Infections happen off-screen. Time skips forward just enough to keep you guessing. That choice is deliberate. Carpenter traps the audience inside the same uncertainty as the characters. You're watching faces, tone, posture, trying to read people the way they are. And the special effects now serve a different purpose. They no longer introduce the horror. They confirm it. Each eruption of violence interrupts a moment of assumed safety. Someone you believed was human isn't. Someone you trusted becomes dangerous. Rob Bottin's work reinforces the film's central idea. The body is evidence, and evidence arrives too late to save anyone. What's terrifying here is how rational everything feels. Isolation becomes policy. Weapons become conversation tools. Leadership is questioned, not because it's weak, but because it might be compromised. Carpenter turned survival into a social problem, not a physical one. By this point, the monster barely needs to act. Fear is doing the work for it, because once doubt enters the room, no one is ever truly alone again, not even with themselves. The blood test is the moment when the thing abandons hope entirely. Up until now, paranoia has been emotional, felt in glances, silences, and distance. The blood test turns it procedural. Fear becomes policy. Everyone restrained, everyone suspect. No one is allowed the dignity of trust. Carpenter stages the scene with brutal simplicity. No music, no cinematic release, just the sound of breathing, the scrape of a chair, the slow drip of blood into a dish. The pacing is excruciating on purpose. You're meant to sit inside the waiting, just like the men are, watching faces, replaying earlier scenes in your head, quietly making accusations of your own. This is where Rob Bottin's effects show extraordinary restraint. For most of the scene, nothing happens. The blood looks normal, lifeless, safe, and that stillness is the cruelty. Carpenter understood that the horror here wasn't transformation, it was anticipation. The audience knows what failure will mean long before it happens. And when it does happen, it's instantaneous. The reaction isn't theatrical, it's biological. A small, violent refusal of heat. Proof arriving not as clarity, but as chaos. Bottin's effect is sharp and sudden, more reflex than reveal, and the room explodes with panic. Violence follows immediately, not because anyone wants it to, but because there's no other option left. What makes the scene so devastating is what it doesn't give you. There's no relief in being right, no satisfaction in exposure, no sense that order has been restored. The blood test doesn't save anyone. It simply confirms what the movie has been building toward all along. In a world where identity can be stolen, proof doesn't heal mistrust. It weaponizes it. After the blood test, there's nothing left to debate. The rules are clear now, and they're merciless. Trust is gone. Proof has done its damage. What remains is a single, brutal calculation. If the thing can survive, If it can freeze and wait, then none of this meant anything. The future itself becomes the threat. This is where the thing shifts from paranoia to resolve. The outpost, once a place of routine and shared labor, turns into a liability. Hallways feel hollow. Rooms feel temporary. The fires that once kept them warm now represent chaos. Carpenter lets the environment decay alongside the character's certainty. Nothing feels worth saving anymore. Not equipment, not shelter, not even the idea of getting out alive. Rob Bottin's effects reach their most disturbing phase here, not because they grow more shocking, but because they abandon restraint. The creature no longer tries to pass. It stops imitating and starts accumulating. Limbs, faces, and textures collide into something that feels less like a monster and more like a record of everything it's taken. There's no final form, only escalation, a body built from theft. Carpenter films these moments without triumph. There's no sense of victory in confronting the thing directly. The effects aren't here to impress you. They're there to make the decision unavoidable. Whatever this is, it cannot be contained. It can only be denied. When the choice is made to destroy the station, it isn't heroic. It's exhausted. Survival, in any personal sense, is already gone. What matters now is refusal. Refusing to let the thing outlive the people who found it. This is the coldest logic of the film. Sometimes the only way to protect the future is to make sure nothing survives the present. When the fire finally dies down in the thing, the movie does something cruel and perfect. It gets quiet. The outpost is gone. The noise is gone. The logic that drove every decision has burned itself out. And what's left isn't victory, it's aftermath. Two figures in the snow, a bottle passed between them, a fire slowly losing its strength. Carpenter understood that this was the moment that would define the film forever. Not the effects, not the chaos, but the refusal to explain. There is no test left, no proof left, no system left that can tell you who is human and who isn't. The movie doesn't pretend to care anymore. Survival has narrowed to minutes, not plans. Whether either man is real no longer changes the outcome. What makes this ending so unsettling is how human it feels. There's no confrontation, no accusation, just a shared understanding that certainty is gone and that it's never coming back. Carpenter frames the scene with distance between the characters, the darkness swallowing most of the frame. They don't move closer. They don't relax. They simply exist together in the cold, waiting. Behind the scenes, Carpenter was adamant that this moment remain unresolved. He knew that answers would weaken the film. Confirmation would turn paranoia into trivia. So he leaves you where the characters are, trapped between suspicion and acceptance, with no safe choice left. The final question isn't who is the thing. It's whether that question even matters anymore. Because by the time the film ends, trust is instinct. And whatever survives next won't be built on certainty. It will be built on waiting. When The Thing was released, it didn't land as a classic. It landed as a problem. Audiences recoiled from it. Critics dismissed it. The horror was too physical, too pessimistic, too uninterested in reassurance. It arrived at a moment when pop culture wanted warmth and optimism, and Carpenter offered paranoia, fire, and the suggestion that survival might not feel like winning. And then the years passed. Away from expectations, the film began to breathe, on VHS, on late-night television, among horror fans who recognized that what The Thing was doing wasn't excess, it was precision. Rob Bottin's practical effects, once criticized as gratuitous, became landmarks of physical horror, not because they were shocking, but because they were believable, tangible, uncomfortable. They looked like they existed in the same space as the actors, and by extension, the viewer. Culturally, the film aged in a way few movies ever do. Its fear of infiltration, its obsession with mistrust, its idea that danger doesn't announce itself, it blends in. All of it began to feel less exaggerated and more observant. Stories built around paranoia, imposters, and sealed environments followed in its wake. The structure of The Thing, ensemble, isolation, doubt, became a template. But no imitation ever quite captured the same chill. Because The Thing isn't just a horror movie. It's an attitude, a refusal to comfort, a belief that certainty is fragile. A story that understands fear doesn't need answers to survive. The film didn't change, the world did. And suddenly, The Thing didn't feel cruel. It felt honest. There's a reason The Thing never really ends. It fades out, yes, but it leaves something behind. A feeling that doesn't resolve. A question that refuses to settle. Long after the final image disappears, the film stays active in your mind, replaying glances, silences, half-truths, and moments where certainty slipped through someone's fingers without them realizing it. That is the true legacy of The Thing. Not the gore, not the shocks, not even the monster. It's the way the film teaches you to doubt the most basic comforts of storytelling. That recognition equals safety. That truth leads to clarity. That survival feels like winning. Carpenter dismantles all of it, piece by piece, and never puts it back together. By the end, you're left in the same place as the characters, aware, exhausted, and unsure whether knowing more would have helped at all. The practical effects are a huge part of why it lingers. Rob Bottin's work doesn't age because it isn't chasing realism. It's chasing violation. The effects feel physical because they are. They occupy space. They resist control. They remind you that bodies are fragile systems and that identity can be overwritten without warning. No digital polish could ever replace that unease. And culturally, the film's pessimism has only grown more resonant. The fear of infiltration, the idea that danger doesn't announce itself, the sense that systems meant to protect us can just as easily turn us against one another. The Thing didn't predict the future. It understood human behavior well enough to wait for it. That's why this film remains untouchable. It doesn't ask you to solve it. It doesn't reward you for picking sides. It doesn't comfort you with answers. It simply presents a scenario where trust collapses and lets you feel the weight of that collapse without relief. In the end, The Thing isn't about monsters. It's about uncertainty. And once that certainty takes hold, it doesn't freeze. It doesn't burn away. It waits, just beneath the surface. If you want to go deeper into The Thing, there's more waiting over on Patreon. The director's cut of this episode pulls back from the story and steps behind the ice, into the decisions, the pressure, and the craft that shaped one of the most uncompromising horror films ever made. We talk about John Carpenter's creative choices, Rob Bottin's breaking point during production, the scenes that push practical effects to their limits, and why the film's bleak worldview was never meant to soften. If Cinemastalgia is about reliving the movies that stayed with us, the director's cut is about understanding why they never left. You can find it now at patreon.com/cinemastalgia.